It started with a silence that didn't sound like peace. Late 1971, Graceland's halls were quieter than ever but not calm. It was the kind of silence that hides behind walls, where every footstep echoes with things left unsaid. Elvis sat alone in his dressing room, staring at his reflection not at the man but at the ghost forming behind the eyes. Fame had made him untouchable to the world but strangely fragile to the people closest to him. And lately, that fragility had a name: Priscilla. For years, she'd been his anchor, the girl who waited, believed, endured. But now something had changed. The laughter had gone missing from her voice. Her eyes followed him the way someone studies a storm cloud waiting for it to break. On the surface, life looked perfect. Money, fame, a family, everything America believed a king should have. But the real story was taking place in the quiet corners of Graceland, where love was eroding one unspoken truth at a time. Elvis wasn't blind to it. He could feel the distance in the way she touched him, not like a wife anymore, but like someone comforting a patient. Every gesture felt measured, every word rehearsed. But it was the little things that started to gnaw at him: a phone call that ended too quickly, a letter she said was from a friend in Los Angeles, trips that didn't match her explanations. At first, he ignored it. He'd been paranoid before: the cost of fame. Everyone wanted something, but this was different. This was personal. And yet, when he tried to confront her, the words just wouldn't come. Because no matter how much he suspected, some part of him still needed to believe she loved him the same way she once did, without calculation, without motive, without fear. The pressure outside their walls didn't help. Colonel Parker was tightening his grip, pushing Elvis into deals he didn't understand, shows he didn't want to play, interviews he didn't remember agreeing to. The colonel's motto was always the same: keep the machine running. But Elvis wasn't a machine anymore, he was breaking. The nights grew longer, the pills heavier, and through it all, Priscilla watched in silence. She'd seen him collapse on bathroom floors, wake drenched in sweat, stare at ceilings, whispering names that weren't hers. She begged him to slow down, to see a doctor, to trust her again. But her words never made it past the fog that surrounded him. Then came the letters, unsigned, typed on plain white paper, slipped under his door at Graceland. The first one said, "They're changing the policies, you should check your name." The second, "Not everyone around you wants you alive." Elvis thought they were cruel fan pranks. He threw them away. But one night when Priscilla was asleep upstairs, curiosity won. He pulled the trash bag out from under the sink and fished them out again. Same typewriter font, same strange warning tone. That was the first time the idea of betrayal stopped being a feeling and became a possibility. He began to notice things: his father whispering with Parker behind closed doors, Dr. Nick making more frequent house calls, and Priscilla, distant yet restless, as if she were part of something she couldn't escape. One night, Elvis followed her car as it left Graceland. She drove to a small diner off Highway 51, parked near the back, and sat there, not eating, not calling anyone, just waiting. 10 minutes later, a man in a dark suit slipped into the passenger seat. They talked. She handed him an envelope. Elvis's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the leather cracked. When she returned home hours later, he was sitting in the dark, waiting. She froze when she saw him. "Where were you?" he asked. "With friends," she said, voice too steady. "What friends?" "Just friends, Elvis." He didn't push further. Maybe he was afraid of the answer. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above them like a slow, hypnotic truth he didn't want to see. By morning, he'd convinced himself there had to be an explanation. There always was. She was loyal, he told himself. Maybe too loyal. Maybe she was doing something for him, for them, for the chaos he couldn't control. But the part of him that had lived too long in the spotlight, the part that had seen contracts twisted, promises broken, loyalty sold, whispered otherwise. Every movement in the house began to sound like a secret. Every closed door felt like evidence. One evening, he walked into his father's office unannounced and caught Vernon hurriedly folding papers into a drawer. "Just bills," Vernon said, smiling too wide. Elvis nodded, but something about the tremor in his father's hand made him sick to his stomach. Later that night, Elvis found himself wandering through Graceland's halls like a ghost. He paused outside Lisa Marie's nursery door and listened to her breathing, steady, innocent. That sound was the only proof left that something pure still existed in his world. Then he heard voices, Priscilla and Vernon, low, tense, coming from the study. He leaned closer to the door. "She's worried about timing," Vernon said. "Then tell her we can't delay," she replied. He froze. Timing, delay. It didn't sound like a conversation between a wife and a father-in-law. It sounded like strategy. When the floor creaked beneath him, Priscilla's voice stopped. The door opened suddenly. She stared at him, her face drained of color. "Elvis," she whispered. "What are you planning?" he asked quietly. "I'm not planning anything." But her eyes betrayed her that flicker of fear, that guilt he couldn't name. That was the moment he stopped believing words and started trusting silence. Over the next few weeks, Elvis withdrew from everyone. Rehearsals turned into excuses. Friends noticed, but no one dared ask. He'd become unpredictable, kind one minute, cold the next, eyes darting to corners like someone waiting for an ambush. Priscilla tried to bridge the gap, but every conversation ended the same way, with her asking him to trust her, and him saying he couldn't afford to. By February 1972, they were strangers under the same roof. The night of the Academy Awards after-party felt like a reprieve, a chance to pretend. They dressed like royalty, smiled for cameras, answered questions they didn't care about, but behind every flash of light was a truth neither of them could escape. When Priscilla locked eyes with the silver-haired man at the bar, Elvis didn't see it, but his body felt it, a tension in the air that made him suddenly aware of every heartbeat. Later that night, as they rode the elevator back to their suite, Priscilla stood silently beside him, her perfume mixing with the smell of whiskey and exhaustion. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. The following weeks blurred together, tour, phone calls, whispers. The gap widened into something unrecognizable. At first, Elvis thought it was jealousy, but soon the suspicion grew darker, not about love but about power. The colonel had recently convinced him to sign a new insurance agreement, standard procedure, he'd said. Vernon had vouched for it. But when Elvis asked for copies of the paperwork, they vanished. Dr. Nick had begun changing his prescriptions without explanation. Stronger doses, new combinations. When Elvis asked why, the doctor's smile never reached his eyes. "It's all to help you rest," he said. Even Red and Jerry, his most trusted friends, had started to act differently. Conversations stopped when he entered the room. Eyes shifted away. Loyalty, it seemed, was starting to thin under the weight of money. One night, as rain lashed against Graceland's windows, Elvis found Priscilla in the living room with a stack of letters spread across the table. When she saw him, she quickly covered them. "What's that?" he asked. "Just bills," she said, the same lie his father had used. She walked past him without another word, leaving the faint scent of her perfume and the thick silence of things breaking beyond repair. That was the night he started locking his bedroom door. In the mornings, he'd wake before dawn, packing the kitchen with a cup of black coffee, staring at the phone as if daring it to ring with the truth. Every creak of the house sounded like betrayal creeping closer. Then one morning, he noticed something odd, a faint imprint on his desk calendar where someone had pressed a pen too hard and left words behind. Under the date February 12th, the words were faint but readable. "Confirm meetings, Rodeo." He recognized her handwriting instantly, Priscilla. Rodeo Drive, Beverly Hills, the heart of everything he hated about fame. That's when he decided he wouldn't confront her again, not with words. He'd watch, quietly, carefully, like a man staking his own life on a truth no one else believed. When she told him she needed to travel for shopping and personal matters, he smiled and kissed her cheek. "Take all the time you need," he said. And as she packed, he noted every detail, the nervous hands, the quick glances at her watch, the suitcase she didn't let the maid touch. After her car disappeared down the drive, he called a number he hadn't used in years, a contact in Memphis law enforcement. "I need someone discreet," Elvis said, "no questions." The man on the line hesitated. "Are we talking about protection?" "No," Elvis replied, voice low, "we're talking about truth." That call would mark the beginning of a month that tore apart everything he thought he knew about love, loyalty, and survival. But before the investigators, before the wiretaps and the secrets, there was just this: a husband sitting alone in his mansion, staring at a calendar with his wife's handwriting on it, trying to convince himself that betrayal always looks different when it's wearing the face of someone you still love. He poured himself another cup of coffee, the bitterness filling the silence. Outside, dawn was breaking over Memphis, soft, golden, indifferent. And Elvis Presley, the most famous man in the world, felt smaller than he ever had in his life. He didn't know it yet, but the decision he'd just made to follow Priscilla, to find out the truth, would uncover a secret so dark it would forever rewrite how history remembered them both. For now, all he could do was wait, and waiting for Elvis had never felt more like punishment. He followed her to Los Angeles the way a man follows a ghost, quietly, with more fear than fury. The flight itself was uneventful, just Elvis tucked behind dark glasses and a collar pulled high, pretending to be another weary traveler. But inside, he was unraveling. Every bump of turbulence felt like a warning from somewhere above you don't want to know the truth. By the time he landed, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, and Los Angeles looked like a city built on secrets. He rented a car under a false name and parked 3 blocks from the Beverly Hills office he'd traced from her note. Hours passed. Then her white Mercedes glided into the underground garage, smooth, deliberate, like she'd done it before. He watched her walk in perfect posture, black sunglasses, a silk scarf around her neck, calm in a way that made him feel anything but. He waited 20 minutes, 30, then the glass doors opened, and one by one his world came apart. Colonel Parker first, the man who claimed to be his protector, stepping into sunlight like a man who had just signed a deal with the devil. Then Dr. Nick, clipboard in hand, that same manila folder he always carried when it involved prescriptions or payouts. Elvis's hands tightened on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He tried to tell himself it was coincidence. But then his father stepped out, Vernon Presley, his own blood, moving like someone with too much to hide and too much to gain. 4 people, 4 betrayals, and in the middle of it all, Priscilla. He wanted to storm in, scream, tear the truth out of the walls, but something stopped him, a voice deep in his gut whispering, not yet. He had to know what they were planning before he made his move. He followed them from a distance for weeks, to restaurants, to meetings, to late-night phone calls. Each clue pulled him deeper into a maze he couldn't escape. At Graceland, the air felt heavier. Even the walls seemed to listen. Priscilla would walk through the rooms humming softly, pretending not to notice the way he watched her. Sometimes she'd stop in the doorway, sensing his eyes on her, and for a brief moment, guilt flickered across her face. Or maybe pity. "Elvis," she said one night, catching him by the window, "you've been quiet lately." He smiled without warmth. "Guess I don't have much left to say." "You don't trust me anymore, do you?" He hesitated. "I trust what I can see." "And what do you see?" He didn't answer because the truth was uglier than either of them could handle. At night, he'd lie awake listening for the phone. When it rang, she always answered first, her voice low, careful, measured. Sometimes he'd catch words, agreement, timing, safe fragments that sounded more like a negotiation than a marriage. He started recording her calls, quietly with a device he bought from a contact in Memphis who owed him favors. Every night he'd replay them, searching for proof, but what he found was worse than silence, half-truths, pauses, voices he couldn't identify. The man who once commanded thousands with a single note was now eavesdropping in his own home, praying to hear something that could still make sense. The isolation was unbearable. He couldn't confide in Red West or Jerry Schilling. They'd only tell him to rest, to trust, to stop imagining things. But imagination was all he had left. The pills multiplied, reds to sleep, blues to wake, whites to forget. He'd take one then another until the edges of reality blurred enough to dull the ache. But when the fog cleared, nothing had changed. Priscilla was still lying beside him, a stranger wearing the face of the woman he loved. Sometimes, in fleeting moments, he saw her tenderness. She'd brush his hair back when she thought he was asleep. Leave notes on his mirror, "You're still my heart. Please don't forget who you are." Those notes confused him more than comforted him. How could someone capable of betrayal also sound so heartbreakingly sincere? One evening after another sleepless night, he went through her drawers while she was out. Among the scarves and perfume bottles, he found a small key taped under the jewelry box. No label, just a key. He turned it in his hand, wondering what it opened: a safe deposit box, a secret drawer, a world he no longer belonged to. The paranoia began to eat him alive. He saw meaning in everything: a glance, a folded napkin, a late arrival. The king of rock and roll was now a prisoner of his own thoughts. Then came the day he decided to test her. He told Priscilla he'd been offered a massive new contract, 10 years, global tour, $50 million. He wanted to see how she'd react. At first, her face lit up, but then, as he described the scale, her smile faded. "That's too much, Elvis. You should slow down. Think about your health." "My health?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. She hesitated. "It's just you've been so tired lately. Maybe this isn't the right time." He leaned forward. "You worried I won't live long enough to finish it?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. That night she cried, quietly in the bathroom behind a closed door. He wanted to go to her to say he was sorry, that he didn't mean it, but the truth was he did, every word. Because deep down he wasn't sure if she was crying for him or for what was falling apart around them. He began to see Colonel Parker differently too. Once the man who made him famous, Parker now felt like a puppeteer, pulling strings even when Elvis wasn't on stage. "Don't worry about the paperwork," Parker said one afternoon, handing him a folder. "Just your signature, son. Routine insurance matters." Elvis flipped through it, pretending to skim. But the legal jargon blurred together: coverage, beneficiaries, accidental death. Who's this for? He asked. You, of course, Parker replied with that grin that had always seemed friendly until now. Standard protection, everyone does it. He didn't sign it, he just closed the folder and handed it back. Not today. That same evening he called Dr. Nick. I'm cutting back on the meds, he said. I don't like what they're doing to me. Dr. Nick's voice on the other end was calm but tense. Elvis, you can't just stop, your body's dependent, it could be dangerous. So could staying on them, he muttered. Are you saying you don't trust me? I don't trust anyone anymore. After he hung up, he felt something unfamiliar, a clarity that came from pain instead of pills. For the first time in months, he saw the situation for what it was, a web, and he was tangled in the center of it. The next morning, he woke up determined to act. If everyone around him had secrets, then he'd have his own. He hired a private investigator under an alias, someone who used to work with the FBI, a man named Jack Morrison. When Morrison arrived, Elvis didn't waste time with introductions. I need eyes on my wife, my father, my manager, and my doctor, he said. The investigator raised an eyebrow. You want me to spy on your family? I want the truth, Elvis said, whatever it costs. Days turned into weeks. Morrison sent updates that only deepened the nightmare, photos, recordings, reports of meetings between the same four people. But the strangest thing was how often Priscilla appeared alone afterward, driving to the same law firm, always at night. It didn't fit the picture of a woman plotting betrayal. It looked like someone preparing for a battle. When Elvis mentioned it to Morrison, the investigator shrugged. Could be she's cutting a deal, could be she's protecting something, hard to say until we know who she's talking to. Those words stuck with him, protecting something. The idea gnawed at him because somewhere beneath the exhaustion and suspicion, a part of him wanted to believe that was true. But belief was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. One night, Morrison handed him an audio reel. You should hear this, he said, caught a recording from one of the office meetings. Elvis played it after midnight, sitting alone in his study. The tape crackled, and then voices filled the room, Parker, Vernon, Dr. Nick, and a fourth he didn't recognize. They spoke of policies, timelines, medical records, cold words, no emotion, just business. Then Parker's voice, the documentation supports rapid decline, should be plausible within 6 months. Vernon's reply trembling, as long as it looks natural. Elvis felt his pulse pound in his temples, natural, they were talking about his death like a schedule. But there was something else buried under the static, a faint female voice, Priscilla. She wasn't plotting, she was questioning. What if he finds out, she asked. He won't, Parker snapped, he's too far gone to see straight. Her next words came barely above a whisper, you're wrong about that. Elvis froze the tape, replayed that sentence again and again. Her tone wasn't cold, it was defiant, protective, like someone walking a tightrope between danger and devotion. For the first time, doubt crept into his anger. Maybe she wasn't part of it. Maybe she was trapped too. But if that was true, why had she lied? Why the phone calls, the secrecy, the fear? He couldn't ask her, not yet, because asking meant revealing he'd been listening, watching, doubting, and once that truth came out there'd be no way back. Still, the guilt began to rot him from the inside. He caught himself watching her sleep, memorizing the lines of her face, wondering how love could survive when trust had already died. Then one evening she came to him, no pretense, no mask, just exhaustion written all over her. Elvis, she said softly, whatever you think is happening, it's worse than that, but it's not what you believe. He looked up from the chair, startled. What do I believe? That I'd ever hurt you, she whispered. Then tell me the truth. I can't, not yet. He stood, heart racing, then went. When it's safe. She turned and walked away before he could speak again. The sound of her footsteps down the hall echoed like a countdown. That night, Elvis couldn't rest. The house felt colder, emptier, alive with unseen eyes. He went to the kitchen, poured himself a drink, and stared out the window at the dark Memphis sky. He didn't know it yet, but the final act of their story was already in motion. Because the very next morning, a new envelope appeared on his doorstep. No return address, just one line typed across the front. If you want to live, trust her. He read it again and again, the words burning holes in his certainty. Was it a warning or a trap? All he knew was that the walls around him were closing in, and the only person who might still be on his side was the one he'd already accused of betrayal. And that realization, that terrible, fragile human truth, was the beginning of the end. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept through the night. Every sound felt amplified, footsteps in the hall, the soft creak of doors, the phone ringing somewhere deep in the house. Elvis had turned Graceland into a cage of echoes, and in the center of it, he waited for the truth to reveal itself. The private investigators' updates had stopped coming. Morrison had promised him answers, but all Elvis had were fragments, photos, transcripts, cryptic notes that only made the paranoia worse. The silence stretched for days until one morning a knock at the back door shattered it. When Elvis opened it, Morrison stood there, rain-soaked, eyes bloodshot, clutching a briefcase like it held a confession. "We need to talk," he said. They sat in the study, the curtains drawn. The only light came from a single lamp, turning the air thick with tension. Morrison opened the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. "You were right," he said quietly. "There's something bigger than you thought." Elvis leaned forward, scanning the papers. Insurance policies, handwritten notes, copies of medical records, all signed with his name except the handwriting wasn't his. "Your father authorized them," Morrison said, "and Colonel Parker helped file them. Accident clauses, life coverage totaling $50 million. Elvis stared at the signatures, his own name forged in perfect imitation. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. Morrison hesitated, then pulled out another folder. "There's more. Your doctor involved too. Prescriptions increased far beyond safe limits, enough to make you look terminally ill." Elvis's jaw tightened. "You're saying they're trying to kill me?" "I'm saying someone benefits a lot if you die soon." The words hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken. He felt it in his chest, betrayal that didn't just sting, it hollowed him out. He rose to his feet, packing, "And Priscilla."